Namaste to everyone. In this class, we are going to discuss about the history of anthropology. The subject, anthropology itself, is a very wide subject, and if you look into the history of anthropology, it is, we can say that it is as old as mankind itself. It is very difficult to find out the origin of the history of anthropology because its roots are deeply involved in the origin of the man itself. The anthropology history is not only concerned with the anthropology, but it associates with the sociology, history, psychology, and other social sciences. Many of the concepts of these social science disciplines are taken from the anthropology. We can trace the origin of history from the Greek historians who has written on the Greek culture and civilization. For a better understanding of the history of anthropology, I have divided the entire history into different phases. That is, the first one is Greek historian, how it was the culture developed in the Greek period. From there, you can have the evidences of cultural development and society's development in various civilizations. The second one is Persia as the dominant culture. The first use of the term anthropology in English, who has coined. Then Abu Rahman Burni in the 11th century. He is the man who has given anthropology terminology. Then medieval scholars, 15th century European explorers, Mervyn Harris framework, empirical anthropology, Buffon's study of human beings, that is, ethnological museums of human populations in Europe. Then anthropology in the 18th and 19th centuries, the beginning of the modern anthropology, evolutionary theory, Bo's contribution to development of anthropology, functionalism, structuralism, symbolic anthropology, and early 20th century antecedents. Then finally, growth of anthropology in the mid 20th century. In this way, I have analyzed and I have going to present in this lecture for a better understanding of you people. I think in this lecture I can satisfy you because it is a vast subject. It itself takes more than 1 week to discuss in detail, but it is taught in 1 hour lesson. Let us proceed towards the lesson. Now let us look into the first phase of history of anthropology, how it has been developed. Anthropology traces its roots to ancient Greek historical and philosophical writings about human nature and the organizations of human society. Anthropologists generally regard Herodotus, a Greek historian who lived 400 years before Christ, as the first thinker to write widely on the concepts that would later become central to anthropology. In the book History, Herodotus described the cultures of various people of the Persian Empire, which the Greek conquered during the first half of the 400 years before Christ. He referred to Greece as the dominant cultures of the West and Persia as the dominant culture of the East. So here, Herodotus clearly tells about the way of life of the Persian Empire, where the people are inhabiting, the people, the culture over there, the differentiation between white and the other populations who are inhabiting in that region, and also the family system and differentiation between different castes and different occupational groups. He has described about the racial discrimination as though he has not mentioned about the name as race, but he has clearly told about the people inhabiting the color, creed, and the way of life, the culture, the civilization, and the architect. What are the buildings and unique structures they have constructed? All these reflects ethnography. It has given an in-depth knowledge about the people inhabiting during the Greek period. So this type of division between the white people, European descent and other peoples established the mode that most anthropological writings would later adopted and developed over a period of time. Second lesson, Introduction to Anthropology. We have discussed about the term anthropology, who has coined it, and what we have discussed in the class. Let us see. The term anthropology is from the Greek anthropos. It means human being, and logos, discourse or the study, and was first used in 1501 by German philosopher Magnus Hunt. Starting the study of Magnus Hunt, Anthropologium in 1501, and Galgius Caprius, another anthropologist who has written Anthropologia in 1533, it may be seen that both these people started claiming that they are the first people who coined the word anthropology, but the competition among them have first promoted as an academic discipline. Magnus Hunt's article was first show that the comprehensive study of humankind with a focus on the unity of body and soul predates the Renaissance and has its roots in late antiquity and the Middle Age. Whereas Capra's Anthropologia is more focused on the study of humankind in the sense of mapping and assessing the various facets of human beings and their existence. These are the two differences in their studies between Magnus Hunt and Capria's studies. So based on the time period and the subject matter which they have published in anthropology, Magnus Hunt, the German philosopher, physician and theologian, Hunt coined the term anthropology and have been mentioned as a founder of anthropology since they used the term in the 16th century. Then you can trace the evolution of anthropology from the medieval period, where we have enough evidences on the society's civilization and culture. So we can look into the medieval period, how it has been developed. Medieval scholars may be considered forerunners of modern anthropology as well, insofar as they conducted or wrote detailed studies of the customs of people considered different from themselves in terms of geography. Here, John of Palino Caprino reported of his stay among the Mongols. His report was unusual in its detailed depiction of a non-European culture. Here he has mentioned about different ways of life of Chinese, that is Mongoloid people, how Mongols are different from other cultures, European cultures. Here he has given a detailed analysis of the people, how they are living in China, the Mongols, their behavior, their culture, food, way of life, the family system and social organization, the kinship system and the way of life he has given clearly in his report. The most important scholar who has written about ethnography, as though he has not mentioned as ethnography, but he has given a detailed analysis of the Indian population, the society, how it is functioning over there, the way of life the Indian people are leading during 11th century. He is no other than the Persian scholar Abu Rahan Burni. Now let us look at his contributions to anthropology. Abu Rahan al-Burni was an Iranian scholar who polymathed during the Islamic Golden Age. He has been called variously the founder of Indology, the father of comparative religion, father of modern goddessy, and the first anthropologist. His book on Indian culture is by far the most important of his encyclopedic work. Its expressive title, Tahik Ma Li Hild Min Mahakla Fi Al Allah Au Mardullaha. It includes all the lore that all Burni could gather about India and its science, religion, literature, and customs. All Burni's work, we can call them ethno-history of India, where he talks about the different cultures, including the science at that time, how it has been flourished, the religion, the Vedas, Upanishads, all these things where he has talked, and the literature and the customs, especially on the customs and cultures. He has talked about various castes, the people, the hierarchy system, occupational groups, and the political system exists at that time. It gives the food they consume at that time, and also the way of life of the people who are living in that period. It is an important ethnographic document which tells about the ethnic history of Indian people at that time. Al-Burni's other important competing encyclopedic work in terms of depth and extent of coverage is the Chronology of Ancient Nations, which is devoted to a universal anthropological account of various cultures and which even records the lore of long dead cultures or of other cultures that were about to disappear. He has discussed about the culture existing during that period and the cultures which are going to extinct from in the future. Also he has told that he is a visionary and he has wrote about the present and also the future which is going to happen for the culture, which is going to disappear at a faster rate. We have the enough evidences that anthropology has developed during 17th and 18th and 19th centuries. The European programs to study the ethnography of the human primitives overseen by colonial administration is a very important development in the history of anthropology. Institutionally, anthropology emerged from the development of natural history, propounded by Georges Louis Leclerc Comte de Buffon, that occurred during the European colonization from 17th to 20th centuries. Programs of ethnographic study originated in this era as the study of the human primitives, overseen by the colonial administrations. Buffon's study of human beings, typically people living in European colonies, thus studying the language, culture, physiology, artifacts of European colonies was more or less equivalent to studying the flora and fauna of those places. It was for this reason, for instance, the Louis Henry Morgan could write monographs on both the leaks of the Iroquois and the American Beaver and his works. This is also why the material culture of civilized nations such as China have historically been displayed in fine arts museums alongside of European art, while artifacts from Africa or native North American cultures were displayed in natural history museums with dinosaurs bones and nature dioramas. In 1836, a Danish architect, Christian Thomson, proposed that three long ages of technology has been preceded the present era in Europe. He called these three stages as Stone Age, Bronze Age, and Iron Age. This is very important classification. Till today we are following this classification. Thomson's concept of technological ages fit well with the views of Scottish geologist Sir Charles Lilly, who proposed that the earth was much older than previously believed and had changed through many gradual changes. This is important concept developed by Danish archaeologist and also supported by Charles Lilly, how the changes took place on the earth. Beginning in the 15th century, European explorers looking for wealth in new lands provided vivid descriptions of the exotic cultures they encountered on their journeys in Asia, Africa, and what are now the Americans. But these explorers did not respect or know the languages of the peoples with whom they came in contact, and they made brief and mystic observations. Historians of anthropology like Mervyn Harris framework empirical anthropology has arisen. Interest in comparison of people over space and interest in long-term human process or humans as viewed through time. Harris dates both to classical Greece and classical Rome, specifically Herodotus, often called the father of the history, and the Roman historian Tacitus, who wrote many of our only surviving contemporary accounts of several ancient Celtic and German peoples. Herodotus first formulated some of the persisting problems of anthropology. The Rise of Anthropology. This is the original book written by Maris Harrison, which gives us the details analysis of the not only the history of anthropology but also the how the theories has been developed over a period of time. So it's an interesting book which I have procured from Chicago for my studies. If if you can able to get, I think as a student of anthropology you must read this book. The British natural scientist Darwin's invention of natural selection brought several changes in the evolutionary theories, not only in biological but also in cultural evolution, which has been changed the face of anthropology itself also. In 1859, British naturalist Charles Darwin published his influential book on the origin of the species. In this book, he argued that animal and plant species had changed or evolved through time under the influence of process that he called natural selection. Natural selection, Darwin said, acted on variations within species, so that some variants survived and reproduced and others perished. In this way, new species slowly evolved even as others continued to exist. Darwin's theory was supported by studies of genetical inheritance conducted in 1850 and 1860s by Austrian monk George Mendel. Evolutionary theory conflicted with the established religious doctrine that all species had been determined at the creation of the world and had not changed since. The English social philosopher Herbert Spencer applied a theory of progressive evolution to human societies in the middle of 1800s. He linked societies to biological organisms, each of which adapted to survive or else perished. Spencer later coined the phrase survival of the fittest to describe this process. Theories of social evolution, such as Spencer's, seem to offer an explanation for the apparent success of European nations as so called advanced civilizations. During the late 1800s, many anthropologists promoted their own models of social and biological evolution. Their writings portrayed people of European descent as biologically and culturally superior to all other populations. The most influential anthropological presentation of this viewpoint appeared in Ancient Society, published in 1877 by American anthropologist Louis Henry Morgan. Morgan argued that European civilization was the pinnacle of human evolutionary progress, representing humanity's highest biological, moral, and technological achievement. According to Morgan, human society had evolved to civilization through earlier conditions or stages, which he called savagery and barbarism. Morgan believed these stages occurred over many thousands of years and compared them to geological ages. But Morgan attributed cultural evolution to moral and mental improvements, which he proposed were in turn related to improvements in the ways that people produced food and to increases in brain size. Morgan also examined the material base of cultural development. He believed that under savagery and barbarism, people owned property communally as groups. Civilization and political states, he said, developed together with a private ownership of property. States that protected people's rights to own property. Morgan's theories coincides with the influential those of German political theorists Friedrich Engels and Karl Marx. Engels and Marx, using a model of like Morgan's, predicted the demise of state-supported capitalism. They saw communism, a new political and economic system based on the ideals of communality, as the next evolutionary stage of human society. Like Morgan, Sir Edward Tylor, a founder of British anthropology, also promoted theories of cultural evolution in the late 1800s. Tylor attempted to describe the development of particular kind of customs and beliefs found across many cultures. For example, he proposed a sequence of stages for the evolution of religion from animism, that is, belief in spirits, through polytheism, that is, the belief in many gods, then to monotheism, that is, belief in one God. This is his greatest works on the human belief system. In 1871, Tylor also wrote a still widely quoted definition of culture, describing it as that complex whole that includes knowledge, belief, art, morals, law, customs, and any other capabilities and habits acquired by man as a member of the society. This definition formed the basis for the modern anthropological concept of culture. In detail, this definition of the culture we will be discussing in the lecture titled as Culture, Cultural Evolution and Cultural Change. A detailed discussion will be done. Now we will have the definition of Tyler, which he has given to us. This definition was widely practiced even today by students of anthropology, sociology, and culture. The two most important British scholars in this tradition are Radcliffe Brown and Malinowski, both of whom released seminal works in 1922. Radcliffe Brown's initial field work in the Andaman Islands was carried out in the old style of historical reconstruction. After reading the work of French sociologist Emile Durkheim and Marcel Mauss, Radcliffe Brown published an account of his research entitled simply The Andaman Islanders that paid close attention to the meaning and purpose of ritual and myths. Over time, he developed an approach known as structural functionalism, which focused on how institutions in societies worked to balance out or create an equilibrium in the social system to keep it functioning harmoniously. Malinowski, in contrast, advocated an unhyphenated functionalism which examined how society functioned to meet individual needs. He is better known, however, for his detailed ethnography and advanced in methodology. His classic ethnography, Argonauts of Western Pacific, advocated getting the native point of view and an approach to fieldwork that became standard in the field. This is another important book of Malinowski, The Sexual Life of Savages. It is really wonderful book. I love this book. As a student of anthropology, you must read this book. Not only anthropology students, but everyone has to read to understand how the civilization among the primitive human populations are existing. He has described about an ethnographic account of courtship, marriage, family, life among the natives of the Trobriand Islanders, the British New Guinea. That is the what he has written. It is published in 1928. This is the publication year of this book. Is really I am fortunate to get the original book for my reading. As an anthropologist, I have the pride that I have collected this book. Speaks about salvage ethnography, overemphasized the functional and integrated nature of economic, political, and religious structures, argued that understanding the native, that is, emic point of view, was the primary goal of ethnography. So, in ethnology and ethnography research methodology, we are going to discuss about this book in detail for understanding of anthropology in different fields. Above all, however, it was Claude Lévi-Strauss who helped institutionalize anthropology in France. In addition to the enormous influence his structuralism exerted across multiple disciplines, Lévi-Strauss established ties with American British anthropologists. At the same time, he established centers and laboratories within France to provide an institutional context within anthropology, while training influential students such as Maurice Godiller and Francois Hitteter, who would prove influential in the world of French anthropology. Much of the distinct characters of France's anthropology today is a result of the fact that most anthropology is carried out in nationally funded research laboratories rather than academic departments in universities. In the 1920s and 1930s, anthropology assumed its present form as a four-field academic profession in the United States under the influence of German-born American anthropologist Franz Boas. Boas wanted anthropology to be a well-respected science. He was interested in all areas of anthropological research and had done highly regarded fieldwork in all areas except archaeology. As a professional and a professor at Columbia University in New York City from 1899 until his retirement in 1937. He helped define the discipline and trained many of the most prominent American anthropologists of the 20th century. Boas urged anthropologists to do detailed research on a particular cultures and their histories rather than attempt to construct grand evolutionary stages for all of humankind in the traditions of Morgan and Taylor. Boas' theoretical approach became known as historical particularism, and it forms the basis for the fundamental anthropological concept of cultural relativism. Many of his students, including Alfred Kroeber, Ruth Benedict, Margaret Mead, went on to establish anthropology departments at universities throughout the country. Many anthropologists working in Boas' time, mostly in Europe, based their research on the theories of 19th century, especially the French sociologist Emile Durkheim. Like Sir Edward Tyler, Durkheim was interested in religions across cultures, but he was not interested in the evolution of religion. Durkheim instead proposed that religious beliefs and rituals functioned to integrate people in groups and to maintain the smooth functioning of the societies. Durkheim's ideas were expanded upon by Bronislaw Malinowski and Radcliffe Brown, two major figures in the development of modern anthropology beginning in the 1920s and 1930s. Their approach to understanding culture was known as structural functionalism or simply functionalism. A typical functionalist study analyzed how cultural institutions kept a society in working order. For example, many studies examined rites of passage, such as initiation ceremonies. Through a series of such ceremonies, groups of children of the same would be initiated into new roles and take on new responsibilities as they grow into adults. According to the functionalists, any unique characteristics of the rites of passage of a particular society had to do with how initiation ceremonies worked in the functions of that society. Functionalists concentrate or their approach is to do field work on their theories. They lived for long periods with the people they studied, carefully recording even every small details about the people's culture and social life. The resulting ethnographies portrayed all aspects of culture and social life as an independent part of a complex model. Functionalist research methods became the blueprint for much anthropological research throughout the 20th century. In the 1950s, French anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss developed an anthropological theory and analytic method known as structuralism. He was influenced by the theories of Durkheim and one of Durkheim's collaborators, French anthropologist Marcel Mauss. Lévi-Strauss proposed that many common cultural patterns, such as those found in myth, ritual, and language, are rooted in basic structure of the mankind. He wrote, for instance, about the universal tendency of the human mind to sort things into sets of opposing concepts such as day and night, black and white, male and female. Levi-Strauss believed such basic conceptual patterns became elaborated through culture. For example, many societies divide themselves into contrasting but complementary groups such as moieties. Each moiety traces its descent through one line to a common ancestor. In addition to many shared ritual functions, moieties create a system for controlling sex and marriage. A person from one moiety may only marry or have sexual relations with a person from the other moiety. In the 1960s, American anthropologists such as Julian Stewart, Roy Rapport, and Marvin Harris began to study how culture and social institutions relate to people's technology, economy, and natural environment. All of these factors together define a people's patterns of subsistence, how they feed, clothe, shelter, and otherwise provide for themselves. The economic and ecological approaches to understand the culture and societies are known as cultural materialism or cultural ecology. Harris, for instance, analyzed the religious practices in India of regarding cows as sacred. He suggested that this religious practice developed as a cultural response to the value of cows as work animals for farming and other essential tasks and as a source of dung which is dried as a fuel. In this context, I wanted to speak about the importance of the cow among the Hindu people. To the Hindu, the cow symbolizes all other creatures. The cow is a symbol of earth, the nourisher, the ever giving, undemanding provider. The cow represents life and the sustenance of life. The cow is so generous, taking nothing but as water, grass, and grain. It gives of its milk as does the liberated soul give of his spiritual knowledge. The cow is so vital to life, the virtual sustainer of life for many humans. The cow is a symbol of grace and abundance. Veneration of the cow instills in Hindus the virtues of gentleness, respectivity, and connectedness with the nature. So, Hindus always worship the cows as mother. The Hindus treat cow as equivalent to mother and mother earth. In the 1970s, many anthropologists, include American ethnologist Clifford Geertz and British ethnologist Victor Turner, moved away from ecological and economic explanations of people's cultures. Instead, these anthropologists looked for the meaning of particular cultural symbols and rituals within cultures themselves, an approach known as symbolic anthropology. Symbolic anthropological studies often focus on one particularly important ritual or symbol with a society. Anthropologists using this approach attempt to demonstrate how this one symbol or ritual shapes or reflects an entire culture. Geertz, for example, attempted to show how the culture of a people of Bali, Indonesia, could be understood by examining the important Balinese ritual of staging and betting on cockfights. Now let us see the early 20th century antecedents, that is, especially among the Europe, that is, in Britain. Museums such as the British museums were not the only site of anthropological studies. With the new imperialism period starting in the 1870s, Jews became an attended laboratories, especially the so called ethnographical exhibitions or Negro villages. Thus, savages from the colonies were displayed, often nudes in cages, in what has been called as human zoos. For example, in 1906, Congolese pygmy Wota Benga was put by anthropologist Madison Grant in a cage in the Bonoxa Zoo, labeled the missing link between an organgatum and the white race. Grant, a renowned educationist, was also the author of The Passing of the Great Race in 1916. Many of the students of Indian anthropology are not aware of these incidents, especially on ethnological human Jews, a long history of exotic people and exhibitions. Just I wanted to discuss with you few minutes on this issue, how it has been developed. This has been developed with the Columbus introduction of indigenous Americans to the Spanish court intensified European interest in non-white races. A new pattern was set by which anthropologists were involved in order to stage living exhibitions. Thousands of indigenous people from all over the world were put on display in a natural or a primitive state to demonstrate racial differences. In both the 1878 and 1888 9 Paris World Fair was celebrated 100 years of liberty, equality, and fraternity. It so by putting on an exposition universelle, or what was known as Negro Village, that attracted overwhelming 28 million visitors who focused their eyes on the 400 stripped down and partially naked Africans and Aboriginals that were thrown into cages as the main attraction and paraded like animals inside the human zoos in front of the large captivated crowds. The Aboriginal Nubians, Egyptians, and Native Americans in Paris were dressed in fanciful costumes and exhibited villages. Other cities such as London, Chicago, Barcelona, Brazil also held similar exhibitions, including Australia, which also had its own variation of women Jews. In 1893, Chicago celebrated the 400th anniversary of the landing of Christopher Columbus with a world exhibition. Frederick Putnam, director of the anthropology department of the fair, invited Prussian-born Franz Boas to collect ethnographic materials. He organized displays of Eskimo art. Putnam would later be appointed director of the Peabody Museum of Archaeology and Ethnology at Harvard, founded in 1866, in the oldest museum of its kind. The Musée d'Ethnographie de Torrentino in Paris dates from 1878. Wota Benga, which I have just now mentioned, a native of Congo, had represented the African section of the St. Louis Fair in 1906. He was taken to New York at the behest of Madison Grant, head of the city's Zoological Society. Benga became part of an ethnological exhibition that was organized by William Temple Hornaday, the first director of the New York Zoological Park, opened in 1899 and known as Bronx Zoo. Touted as the savage pygmy, Wota was displayed in a monkey house, shot targets with bow and arrow, and bristled with an orangutan. With this teeth filed to points at his cage, floor littered with bones, he was made to play the role of a menacing savage. Labeled the missing link, it was suggested that in evolutionary terms, Africans were closer to apes than were Westerners. The public flocked to see a spectacular that triggered protests from the clergy. Non-Western society was an animal park. The social Darwinist Jew keeper. In 1919, Madison Grant published The Passing of the Great Race, or The Racial Basis of European History, in which he expounded the theory of white superiority and argued for a strong eugenics programs. That same year, Ota Benga committed suicide. Is a pathetic condition how the Europeans has treated the aborigines all over the world. Anthropology grew increasingly distinct from natural history, and by the end of the 19th century, the discipline began to crystallize into its modern form. By 1935, for example, it was possible for T.K. Penniman to write a history of the discipline entitled 100 Years of Anthropology. At the time, the field was dominated by the comparative method. It was assumed that all societies passed through a single evolutionary process from the most primitive to most advanced. Now let us look into the upheavals and transitions of anthropology. It was into this world, upheavals and transitions, that anthropology first emerged as an academic discipline. The first step was the establishment of the ethnographic museums, collections of exotica and long extend at the European courts. One of the earliest, founded by Danish King Frederick III, dates back to 1650 and would later form the basis of the Danish National Museum. But systematic collection of ethnographic material only started in the 1800s. Large national museums were established in London, that is in 1753, in Paris 1801, and Washington DC 1843, and these would all eventually develop influential ethnographic departments. So you can say these museums, over a period of time, turned into ethnographic study departments. Still, the first specialized ethnographic museums were established in German speaking areas, notably in Vienna in 1806, Munich in 1859, and Berlin in 1868. This may seem surprising as Germany and Austria had no colonial empires. Nevertheless, German academics had, in accordance with the Herders program, began to carry out empirical studies of the customs of the people. They collected data on peasant life, folk tales and legends, dress and dance, crafts and skills. The earliest museums were primarily concerned with Volkskunde, that is, mainly concerned with the study of peasants and peasant cultures. Then the Volkerkunde was established, that is, the study of remote people, that is, tribals, or who are living in the interior regions. Thus, the institutionalization of anthropology commenced in Germany rather than in France or Britain, a fact that it often overlooked in accounts of the history of anthropology. I had the opportunity to be as a visiting professor in the Volker Kunde, that is Institute of Anthropology and African Studies, Munich, for 2 times to teach Indian anthropology over there. I am fortunate to see the museums in Germany, Berlin, and different places, including Paris, what the museums say about anthropology, anthropological development, anthropology of history. I hope you might have, to some extent, understood the history of anthropology, how it has been evolved. Hope it is a vast subject matter, but I tried my level best to put into you before you in a nutshell. I hope you enjoyed this lecture. Hope we will see you in the next class. Thank you very much for listening. This is one of the happy moments with the distinguished professors, Professor Cap, head of the Department of Indology, Cologne University, Cologne, and Professor Labucher, Director, Institute of Anthropology and African Studies. What we have told now, it is Walker Kundre. I had enough experience with these two professors, sharing my knowledge with the students and faculty of anthropology in Germany.